In this episode of Shadow Reviews, I'm going to be reviewing Azrael Annual number 2. One of the annuals from 1996 that was part of the Legends of the Dead Earth event, which was a series of Elseworlds titles that either saw the DC characters that you know and love in either a medieval setting or a post-apocalyptic setting. The story itself is titled Night's Fall, and it is kind of an adaptation of the Nightfall storyline. The story begins with Azrael fighting this monster who may have come from Gotham. He uses magic to summon a sword, which is pretty unique, and he essentially kills the monster, and he heads back to his base, the headquarters of the Order of St. Dumas. Azrael is then told to speak with the Oracle, which he is kind of hesitant to do, but he eventually does, and the Oracle essentially gives Azrael his destiny, which is to go to Hell, face the king, and unite with him, and liberate the slaves that are being kept in Hell. The Oracle says that oracles never repeat themselves, but he then tells them that Hell is obviously Gotham City. Azrael is to defeat the King of Hell, then unite with him, and then free the people who are enslaved in Gotham City. Then he instructs Azrael to close the box so he can take a nap. Azrael and his servant Brian then close the box, as Brian tells Azrael that he heard about an underground river that could take them to Gotham City, or at least a rumor of an underground river, when he's interrupted by Brother Rollo, the leader of the Order of St. Dumas, who doesn't really believe anything the Oracle says. And suddenly it cuts to a monk telling the story of Azrael to a bunch of kids, and I don't really get it. I mean, this would have made a better ending, but I'll let it pass. So anyways, Azrael and Brian begin their quest, and when the quest begins, that's where this comic really becomes interesting. As in, they meet medieval versions of 3 different Batman villains, the first of which being Two-Face, who's flipping a coin to determine whether to be good or evil. Brian asks Two-Face for direction, and when Two-Face asks if he looks like he knows the way to Gotham, Brian actually responds by telling him that half of him actually does, alluding to him having the sign that says right way essentially pointed in a way where they could see it. And as they move on, Two-Face continues to flip his coin so that he can decide whether or not to be good or evil. So anyways, Azrael and Brian approach a dock with a sign that says, "Beware of the monster." And they're looking for someone who has a boat. And then they encounter a medieval version of the Joker, who says that he has a boat that they can use, and he'll let them use it for free. All they have to do is laugh at one of his jokes. He tells them a joke, even though it's not really funny, but needing to get to Gotham City fast, Azrael and Brian laugh, or at least pretend to laugh. So anyways, they get in the boat, and the Joker tells them that should anyone whistle on the way to Gotham, they'd be instantly consumed by a sea serpent that is currently in that part of the ocean, lake, river, whatever you want to call it. And then the Joker instantly whistles for no reason whatsoever. The sea serpent appears, and Azrael is forced to fight it. He attacks the sea serpent with that magic sword of his, and is able to kill it. But as punishment for being the one to whistle, Azrael decides that they leave the Joker in the ocean. And then they arrive at Gotham City. And they instantly run into a Dark Age version of Alfred, who tells them that Gotham City is a terrible place, especially as of late. Telling them that 1 month ago, a giant ogre named Bane arrived in Gotham and challenged the Bat King to a fight. Azrael and Brian are then shown actual video footage of the fight, and it's essentially a fantasy interpretation of the Batman vs. Bane fight from the Nightfall event. Then the fantasy Alfred tells them that Bane had been playing this footage over and over again for the sole purpose of breaking the spirits of the people of Gotham City. Azrael looks directly at the Bat King and instantly feels this weird connection, something that he himself admits is telling him to go and defeat Bane. As Azrael instantly charges off without thinking or making a plan and fights Bane. But he tries his magical flaming sword, but Alfred quickly tells him to stop, saying that if he kills Bane, the Bat King will die as well. Azrael asks for an explanation, and Alfred tells him that Bane somehow removed the Bat King's heart and put it inside his body. Azrael is able to get behind Bane and charge forward. Now, he does not win this fight because it's meant to mirror the first time that Jean-Paul Valley, Azrael's real name, fought Bane in the main universe, otherwise known as Earth Prime. So anyways, Azrael busts in to the room where Bane is holding the Bat King. They meet, and the Bat King tells Azrael to remove his mask, essentially revealing that they look identical when the Bat King is not wearing his mask. The Bat King then reveals that they are the same person. They were split into two different people at birth by magic cast upon them by Brother Rollo, because he didn't want them to fulfill their destiny, and so that Brother Rollo could maintain his power. But then they instantly fuse together upon seeing each other. And this is essentially, in a way, similar to the scene from Dragon Ball Z where Kami fuses with Piccolo. Having fused together, Azrael and the previous Bat King essentially become a new incarnation of the Bat King, which is meant to parallel Jean-Paul Valley's time as Batman. Well, the second incarnation of the Bat King had been formed. Brian and Alfred had kept Bane distracted, who then says he's going to eat them when he says says he's going to taste their meat, and then turns around to see Bat King number 2 standing there, and Bane knows he's not going to win this fight, and it's really badass when Bat King number 2 says, "You wish to challenge me? Still hunger for meat?" Which Bane looks up and says, "What, me? Vegetarian, me?" and runs off as the Bat King says, "Go and stop when someone asks you your name in Chinese." So then Alfred takes Brian and the Bat King underground and shows them the real Gotham City. as well as the underground river that Brian mentioned at the beginning of the comic. And while traveling by boat, they encounter a fantasy version of Oracle. She gives them directions to where they are to go to, fulfill their destinies. There's a wall made of ice, but then the new Bat King is able to summon Azrael's flaming sword, which he then uses to smash through the ice, symbolizing that he wields the power of both of his halves, his light half, Azrael, and his dark half, the original Bat King. They sail through, and they find the big secret. In fact, the ultimate secret of the Order of Saint Dumas, that they had been keeping people locked up as slaves for the sole purpose of generating power, which, in a medieval fantasy setting, this is the kind of thing you'd expect, because it's based off the Dark Ages, a time where slavery was common, and then there's the fact that these people most likely would have believed in something very similar to the Bible, which is pro-slavery. So anyways, the new Bat King slices through the pipes, turning the power off, and essentially tells the slaves they're free and to go find their destinies as he will go find his, bringing the comic to a close. In all, this is a really good read. I mean, I like it. It's basically a fantasy version of KnightQuest, which was one of my favorite Batman stories growing up. And another thing that I have come to respect about this comic during the review is a lot of the parallels they draw and how well they incorporate these characters into this world by essentially making fantasy versions of superheroes and supervillains. In terms of villains, you have fantasy versions of Two-Face, the Joker, and Bane. While in terms of heroes, you have fantasy versions of KnightQuest Batman, Alfred, and Oracle. And the footage of the fight that Bane used to break the spirits of the people of Gotham City is a direct allusion to the cover of Batman 497, where Bane actually did break the bat. In fact, the only other Elseworlds title that I can think of that wrote their characters so extremely similar to their Prime Earth counterparts is Superman Red Son. Another good thing about this storyline is that the Oracle's prediction is not only true, but he essentially speaks in metaphor when he says that Azrael would essentially liberate the slaves. He does. But that's not a metaphor. When he says that Azrael would find his true identity, he does so when he meets and merges with the Bat King. Essentially, when he finds out that they were originally one person, but Brother Rollo split them in two using magic and separated them because he was afraid of them. The Oracle also said that Azrael would have to kill the King of Gotham. And although Bane was not the King of Gotham, he could have been seen as king in a sense, as he was the one who was holding all the power and had consumed the Bat King's heart to essentially make sure that even if he did lose a fight, no one in Gotham would have the balls to kill him. But when Azrael becomes the new Bat King, he essentially he basically pulls off the ultimate workaround for Bane's trump card, and he scares him away from Gotham, and essentially he caused him to lose the grip he had over Gotham City. So metaphorically, by merging with the Bat King, Azrael did kill the King of Gotham. The Order of St. Dumas, using slave labor to power their base, is essentially a good villain motivation. And, it's a good villain motivation because it's very realistic. This sort of thing was common in the Middle Ages, and I could even see the church today doing something like this. Brother Rollo is essentially, despite the fact that he doesn't get involved with any of the fights, he's essentially nothing more than a power-hungry scumbag who has a grip over the people and wants to make sure it stays that way. I could see a future pope doing something like this. When I say the whole thing about the Order of St. Dumas having slaves, and the fact that Brother Rollo is a corrupt tyrant, I could definitely see something like that happening in the real world. I could see the church pulling a stunt like that, and I could see the Pope behaving in that manner, while at the same time trying to look respectable to the rest of the world. Now, if there's one thing that I don't really think would fit in the whole comic, or at least shouldn't be where it is, it would be the panel where the monk is telling the story of Azrael and Brian to these kids. That's something that you normally should save for an ending, to essentially say everything you saw up till this point happened at least 100 years ago. Overall, Azrael Annual number 2. It's a great read, and if you can find it, you should definitely pick it up. It is excellent. This is the kind of comic that you should look for online if you could, because it is excellent. And if you ever swing by milehighcomics.com, this is one that you should definitely purchase if they have it. And with that, this review comes to an end.